The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan valley as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera adjusted his tactical vest and checked his ammunition for the third time. The intelligence briefing had been clear. A Taliban stronghold was operating from a remote village, coordinating attacks on NATO supply convoys. What the briefing hadn't mentioned was how quiet everything felt. Rivera's unit, Bravo Company's 2nd Platoon, had been moving through the mountainous terrain for 6 hours. 24 soldiers, split into 3 squads, advancing on what should have been a routine clearing operation. The kind of mission they'd run dozens of times before. The kind that usually ended with detained suspects, confiscated weapons, and another small victory in an endless war. "Movement 2 o'clock," whispered Corporal Johnson, the youngest member of Rivera's squad. His voice carried the tension that came with being new to combat operations. 6 months in country, still jumping at shadows. Rivera followed Johnson's gaze through his binoculars. A figure moved between 2 mud brick buildings, barely visible for a split second before disappearing. Could be a civilian. Could be a lookout. In this part of Afghanistan, the distinction often meant the difference between going home and going home in a box. "I see it," Rivera responded through his radio. "Alpha Squad, you picking up any movement on your side?" Staff Sergeant Martinez's voice crackled through the comm. "Negative. Dead quiet over here. Too quiet." That was the thing about Martinez. 10 years in the Army, 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. When Martinez said something felt wrong, smart soldiers listened. Rivera had learned to trust that instinct during their previous deployments together. The village spread below them like a collection of children's blocks scattered on brown carpet. Maybe 30 buildings total, connected by dirt paths that had been worn smooth by generations of foot traffic. Satellite imagery showed the usual layout. Residential compounds, a small mosque, a marketplace that probably saw more goats than commerce. Nothing that screamed terrorist stronghold, but that was often how these things worked. Lieutenant Williams, fresh out of West Point and eager to prove himself, moved up to Rivera's position. "Sergeant, what's the holdup? We're behind schedule." Rivera bit back his first response. Officers like Williams meant well, but they hadn't yet learned that schedules meant less than survival in places like this. "Sir, something feels off." Martinez's squad reports no movement, no sound. In a village this size, we should be seeing kids, animals, something. Williams consulted his tablet, swiping through digital maps and operational timelines. Intelligence indicates this is a working village. Approximately 60 residents, mostly farmers and herders. They can't all just disappear. Maybe they can, sir. Maybe they did. Rivera kept his binoculars trained on the buildings below. Question is why? The radio crackled again. This time, it was Sergeant Foster from Charlie Squad, positioned on the village's eastern approach. "Bravo 6, we got abandoned positions up here. Fresh digging, recent construction. Looks like fighting positions." Rivera felt his stomach tighten. Fighting positions meant someone had been preparing for exactly this kind of operation. Someone who knew they were coming. "How recent, Foster?" Williams asked, taking over radio communications. "Dirt's still soft, sir. Maybe 12 hours, maybe less. And there's something else. Found some brass casings. Russian manufacture, 7.62 by 54. Sniper rounds." The pieces clicked together in Rivera's mind like a weapon being assembled. Empty village. Recent fortifications. Sniper ammunition. They weren't walking into a clearing operation. They were walking into a trap. "Sir," Rivera said, his voice urgent but controlled. "We need to pull back and reassess. This whole thing stinks." Williams shook his head. "Negative, Sergeant. We have our orders. Intelligence spent weeks planning this operation. We're not turning around because of some empty buildings and old ammunition." Rivera wanted to argue, but military hierarchy was military hierarchy. Williams was young and inexperienced, but he was still the officer in charge. Still, Rivera had ways of protecting his soldiers without directly contradicting orders. "Johnson," he called to his youngest squad member, "take Thompson and circle around to the north. Keep your distance, but get eyes on those buildings from a different angle. Something moves, I want to know about it." Johnson nodded and moved off with Thompson, a steady soldier from Ohio who'd been in country for 14 months. Good combination: youth and experience, caution and aggression. The advance continued, but Rivera kept his squad spread wide and moving slowly. Whatever was waiting in that village had been planned. Professional fighters didn't abandon positions and leave behind expensive ammunition unless they had something better waiting. 30 minutes later, they reached the village outskirts. The silence was absolute. No dogs barking, no chickens clucking, no children's voices. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Alpha squad in position," Martinez reported. "Charlie squad ready," Foster confirmed. Williams studied his tablet one more time, then gave the order. "All squads, begin clearing operations. Standard room to room. Watch for IEDs and stay alert." Rivera's squad took the southern approach, moving between buildings with practiced precision. Each doorway was a potential threat, each window a possible sniper position. Thompson and Johnson rejoined the squad as they approached the first compound. The first building was empty. Not just unoccupied, stripped clean. No furniture, no personal belongings, no signs that anyone had lived there recently. The second building was the same. Then the third. "This is wrong," muttered Specialist Davis, Rivera's machine gunner. "People don't just pack up everything and leave. Not unless they know something bad is coming." Rivera was thinking the same thing when his radio exploded with sound. "Contact! Contact! We're taking fire from multiple positions." It was Martinez, and Rivera could hear automatic weapons fire in the background. Then Foster's voice joined in. "Sniper fire from the mosque. Charlie squad is pinned down." The trap had been sprung. Rivera's squad was caught in the open, 50 meters from the nearest cover. Muzzle flashes erupted from windows and rooftops that had appeared empty moments before. The sharp crack of AK-47s mixed with the deeper boom of heavier weapons. "Move! Find cover!" Rivera shouted, but his voice was nearly lost in the chaos. Johnson went down first, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers as Thompson grabbed him and dragged him toward a low wall. Davis opened up with his machine gun, laying down suppressing fire that gave the rest of the squad precious seconds to find protection. But protection was scarce. They were in the middle of a killing field, surrounded by enemy positions that had been carefully prepared and expertly concealed. Whoever had planned this ambush knew their business. Williams' voice came through the radio, high with stress. "All squads, report status. All squads, report. Alpha squad is pinned down." Martinez responded between bursts of gunfire. "Multiple casualties. We need immediate support. Charlie squad is combat ineffective," Foster reported. 3 wounded, 1 critical. "We can't move." Rivera assessed his own situation. His squad was trapped behind inadequate cover, taking fire from at least 6 different positions. Johnson was wounded but mobile. Davis was burning through ammunition at an unsustainable rate. Thompson was trying to treat Johnson's wound while returning fire, and they were completely surrounded. "Sir," Rivera called to Williams, "we need air support, and we need it now." Williams was already working his radio, calling for helicopter gunships and medical evacuation. But Rivera knew those assets were at least 20 minutes away. In a firefight like this, 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours. The enemy fire was coordinated and professional. Whoever was shooting at them knew how to maintain overlapping fields of fire, how to keep the Americans pinned down while maneuvering for better positions. This wasn't random Taliban fighters with old weapons. This was something more organized, more dangerous. "Movement to the east," Thompson called out. "They're trying to flank us." Rivera could see them now. Figures in military gear moving between buildings, using cover and concealment like trained soldiers. They were being pushed into an even smaller pocket, compressed into a space where the enemy could bring concentrated fire to bear. Davis's machine gun went silent. "I'm out," he shouted, reaching for a fresh belt of ammunition. In that moment of reduced covering fire, the enemy pressed their advantage. Automatic weapons fire erupted from 3 new positions, and Rivera realized they were about to be overrun. "Williams," he called to the lieutenant. "We need to move, or we're all dead." But Williams was down, clutching his leg where a bullet had found its mark. His radio lay beside him in the dirt, damaged by shrapnel from a grenade explosion. Rivera was now the senior soldier, responsible for 23 other lives in the middle of a perfectly executed ambush. The enemy had planned this operation carefully, using intelligence about American tactics and timing to create an inescapable trap. But Rivera had been in situations like this before. Not exactly like this. Few soldiers survive encounters this bad, but close enough to know that panic was the enemy's best ally. Clear thinking and aggressive action were their only hope. "Davis, how much ammo do you have left?" he called to his machine gunner. "2 belts, maybe 300 rounds. "Thompson, Johnson's status?" "Stable for now, but he needs a medic." Rivera checked his own ammunition. For magazines, approximately 120 rounds. Not much for a prolonged firefight, but enough for what he had in mind. "Listen up," he shouted to his squad. "We're going to move in bounds. Davis, you lay down covering fire on those positions to the north. Thompson, you and Johnson move to that building with the blue door. I'll follow with Williams." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was movement, and movement was life. Staying pinned down would only give the enemy time to close the noose. Davis opened up with his machine gun, sending long bursts toward the enemy positions. Thompson grabbed Johnson under the arms and began dragging him toward the building Rivera had indicated. Return fire chewed up the ground around them, but they made it to cover. Rivera grabbed Williams under the shoulders and began pulling him toward the same objective. The lieutenant was conscious but pale from blood loss and shock. Halfway to the building, Rivera felt something tug at his sleeve. A bullet had passed close enough to tear fabric, but not flesh. They reached the building as Davis's covering fire slackened. The machine gunner was already moving, bounding toward their position while enemy bullets sparked off stones and metal around him. Inside the building, Rivera quickly assessed their situation. They had temporary cover, but they were still surrounded. Martinez's squad was somewhere to the north, probably in similar straits. Foster's squad was reportedly combat ineffective. Air support was still 15 minutes out, and the enemy was closing in. Through a crack in the wall, Rivera could see figures moving closer. Professional movements, coordinated advances. These weren't insurgents with more enthusiasm than training. These were soldiers, probably foreign advisors or mercenaries with real military experience. "Davis, set up your gun covering that doorway," Rivera ordered. "Thompson, get on the radio and see if you can raise anyone." Thompson worked with the damaged radio, while Rivera moved to a window overlooking their back trail. What he saw made his blood run cold. At least a dozen enemy fighters were moving toward their building, using fire and maneuver tactics that would have impressed his old drill sergeants. "Sergeant," Thompson called softly. "I'm getting something on the radio. Sounds like a woman's voice. Rivera Froneth." There were no female soldiers in their unit, and American Air Support would be using standard military call signs and procedures. "Put on speaker," Rivera ordered. Static filled the small room. Then a clear, calm voice came through. "American soldiers, this is Overwatch. I see your position, and I can provide assistance. Do you copy?" Rivera grabbed the radio handset. "Overwatch, this is Staff Sergeant Rivera, 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company. Who is this? What's your location?" "Rivera, I'm in position to provide sniper support. I count 14 enemy fighters moving on your position. Keep your heads down and be ready to move when I tell you." "Negative, Overwatch. Identify yourself. What unit are you with?" But the voice had already moved on. Enemy sniper in the mosque minaret. Taking the shot. A second later, Rivera heard the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle. Through his window, he saw one of the advancing enemy fighters suddenly stumble and fall. The others immediately sought cover, their coordinated advance disrupted. Enemy machine gun position, east wall. taking the shot. Another crack, and Rivera watched an enemy soldier spin away from a window, his weapon falling to the ground. Whoever this Overwatch was, she was good. Very good. Rivera, you have approximately 30 seconds before they reorganize. Move your wounded to the building with a red door, 200 meters northeast of your position. I'll provide covering fire. Rivera looked through the window. The building sheet indicated was visible, but reaching it would mean crossing open ground while under fire. It was a calculated risk, but staying put was certain death. Do it, Rivera decided. Thompson, you take Johnson. Davis, you help with Williams. I'll bring up the rear. They moved in a rush, bursting through the doorway and running across the dusty courtyard. Enemy fire erupted immediately, but it was poorly aimed and scattered. Whoever Overwatch was, she was keeping the enemy fighters pinned down and disorganized. Two more rifle cracks echoed across the valley as they ran. Rivera saw an enemy fighter fall from a rooftop position, then another disappear behind cover as a bullet sparked off the wall beside his head. They reached the building with the red door as rifle fire continued from an unknown position. Rivera could tell from the sound that their mysterious sniper was using a powerful weapon, probably .308 caliber or larger, and she was shooting with the precision of a professional marksman. Inside the new building, Rivera found better cover and a clear field of view. Through a window facing east, he could see Martinez's squad moving between buildings. They were still alive, still fighting, but clearly under pressure. Overwatch, this is Rivera. We're in position. What's your status? I count 8 enemy fighters still active. They're regrouping for another assault. Your air support is 12 minutes out. We need to keep them dispersed until then. Roger that. But I need to know who you are and how you got here. A pause, then independent contractor, Rivera. That's all you need to know right now. Are you prepared to provide covering fire for your other squads? Rivera was full of questions, but tactical necessities took priority over curiosity. An independent contractor could mean private military company, intelligence operative, or any number of other possibilities. What mattered was that she was keeping them alive. Affirmative. What do you need us to do? Your Alpha squad is trapped in the building with the green shutters. I'm going to eliminate the enemy fighters keeping them pinned down. When I do, they'll have a clear path to your position. Be ready to provide suppressing fire. Rivera positioned his soldiers at windows overlooking the route Martinez's squad would need to take. Davis set up his machine gun with a clear field of fire. Thompson found a position where he could cover Johnson while still engaging targets. Stand by. Overwatch's voice came through the radio. 3 shots in rapid succession echoed across the valley. Rivera watched through his binoculars as enemy positions that had been firing steadily suddenly went quiet. Alpha Squad, this is Overwatch. You have a clear path to the building with the red door. Move now. Rivera saw Martinez's squad emerge from their cover and begin bounding toward their position. Enemy fighters tried to engage them, but Davis's machine gun and rifle fire from Rivera's position kept them suppressed. It took 4 minutes for Martinez's squad to reach their building. 4 of his soldiers were wounded, but all were mobile. Martinez himself had taken a bullet through his left arm, but was still functional. Where the hell did she come from? Martinez asked as soon as he was inside the building. Don't know, Rivera replied. Claims to be an independent contractor. But whoever she is, she's keeping us alive. The radio crackled again. All American forces, be advised that enemy reinforcements are moving up the valley from the south. Approximately 20 fighters with vehicles. Your air support is 8 minutes out. Rivera felt his stomach drop. 20 fresh enemy fighters would tip the balance decisively against them. Even with air support coming, 8 minutes was too long to hold against those odds. Overwatch, can you slow down those reinforcements? Negative. Too much distance and too many targets. But I can help with the fighters still in the village. As if to emphasize her point, another rifle shot rang out, followed by the sound of breaking glass and someone screaming in pain or anger. Rivera gathered his squad leaders around him. Martinez from Alpha Squad, Foster had managed to reach their position with what remained of Charlie's squad. Williams was conscious, but clearly in no condition to command. "Here's the situation," Rivera said quietly. "We got maybe 15 enemy fighters in the village, 20 more coming up the valley, and air support 8 minutes out. We can't stay here, and we can't retreat. So we're going to advance." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Advance into what? They got us outnumbered 3-1. Not if Overwatch keeps thinning them out. Look, whoever she is, she's a professional. She's been picking off their key players, disrupting their coordination. If we can create enough chaos, we might be able to break their defensive line and link up with our air support when it arrives." It was a desperate plan, but desperate situations called for desperate measures. Rivera had learned long ago that in combat, motion was often better than paralysis, even when the motion seemed suicidal. Foster spoke up. "My squad's pretty shot up, but we can still fight. Just tell us where you need us." Rivera studied the village layout through his window. The enemy fighters were positioned in a rough semicircle, trying to contain the American forces while the reinforcements closed the trap. But their positions were spread thin, and Overwatch had already eliminated several key positions. "We'll move in 3 groups," Rivera decided. "Martinez, take your squad and move toward the mosque. That's where their command element is probably located. Foster, take your people and move west. Try to get behind their flank. I'll take my squad straight up the middle." "What about the wounded?" Thompson asked. Rivera looked at Johnson, Williams, and the other casualties. They couldn't fight effectively, but they couldn't be left behind either. The radio crackled. "Rivera, I've been monitoring your conversation. Leave your wounded in this building. I can provide Overwatch protection for them while you move." "How do we know you'll be able to protect them?" Rivera asked. "Because," the voice replied calmly, "I haven't let any of you die yet." It was true. Despite being surrounded and outnumbered, despite walking into a carefully planned ambush, Rivera's unit had suffered casualties, but no fatalities. And most of that was due to the mysterious sniper who had appeared at exactly the right moment. "All right," Rivera decided. "We move in 2 minutes. Remember, we're not trying to hold ground. We're trying to create confusion and stay alive until our birds arrive." He checked his weapon one more time, counted his remaining ammunition, and tried to calm the nervous energy that always preceded combat. Somewhere out there, an unknown woman with a sniper rifle was the only thing standing between his soldiers and death. As they prepared to move out, Rivera found himself wondering who she was and how she'd arrived at exactly the moment they needed her most. Independent contractors didn't usually operate alone in remote Afghan valleys. They didn't usually possess the kind of marksmanship skills he'd witnessed, and they definitely didn't usually risk their lives for strangers. But those questions would have to wait. Right now, survival was the only priority that mattered. The sound of vehicles approaching from the south was getting louder. Time was running out. Rivera's squad burst from the building at exactly 0900 hours, moving with the desperate precision of soldiers who understood that hesitation meant death. Davis led with his machine gun, laying down suppressing fire that forced enemy fighters to duck behind cover. Thompson followed, his rifle cracking steadily as he engaged targets of opportunity. The mysterious sniper's rifle spoke again from somewhere in the surrounding hills. Rivera saw an enemy fighter on a rooftop spin and fall, his weapon clattering down into the street below. Whoever Overwatch was, her timing was flawless, her shots placed with surgical precision. "Alpha squad moving." Martinez's voice crackled through the radio as his soldiers advanced toward the mosque complex. Rivera could see them bounding between buildings, using cover and concealment while enemy fire snapped around them. Foster's Charlie squad was moving west, trying to get behind the enemy's flank. They were down to 5 effective soldiers, but Rivera could see them advancing steadily, using the confusion created by the other squad's movements to mask their own approach. Rivera's squad took the direct route, advancing straight toward the center of the enemy position. It was the most dangerous approach, but it would draw the most attention and hopefully give the other squads room to maneuver. "Contact front," Davis shouted, opening up with his machine gun as enemy fighters appeared in windows ahead of them. The heavy weapon's distinctive roar echoed between the buildings as brass casings scattered across the dusty ground. Rivera moved to Davis's left, engaging targets with his rifle while looking for better cover. The enemy return fire was intense, but poorly coordinated. Overwatch's sniper fire had clearly disrupted their command structure, leaving individual fighters to act without central coordination. A rifle bullet whined past Rivera's ear as he dove behind a stone wall. The enemy was close enough that he could hear them shouting to each other in Arabic and what sounded like Chechen. Foreign fighters, just as he'd suspected. Professionals who had come to Afghanistan to kill Americans. "Thompson, how's our ammunition situation?" Rivera called to his soldier. "Running low. Maybe 60 rounds left." Davis's machine gun fell silent. "Changing belt," he announced, swapping out the empty ammunition belt for his last full one. The momentary lull in their covering fire allowed enemy fighters to advance. Rivera saw movement in a building to his right and put 2 quick shots through the window. A man screamed and fell back into the darkness. "Overwatch, this is Rivera," he called into his radio. "We're starting to run low on ammunition." "How much longer until air support?" "For minutes," the calm female voice replied. "But we've got a problem. Those vehicles from the south are closer than expected. I count 3 trucks with mounted weapons and approximately 20 dismounted fighters." Rivera's blood ran cold. 20 fresh fighters would double the odds against them, and mounted weapons meant heavy machine guns or possibly something worse. His soldiers were already running low on ammunition, and they'd taken casualties that reduced their fighting effectiveness. "Can you engage the vehicles?" Rivera asked. "Negative. Too much distance, and my current position doesn't have line of sight to the southern approach." That meant Rivera's unit would have to deal with the reinforcements while still fighting the enemy forces already in the village. Simple arithmetic said that was impossible, but arithmetic had never stopped a good soldier from trying. "Martinez, Foster, you copy that last transmission?" "Roger," Martinez replied. "Alpha Squad is at the mosque. We've secured the building, but we're finding evidence of a much larger operation here." "What kind of evidence?" Rivera asked while engaging an enemy fighter who was trying to move between buildings. "Maps, communications equipment, intelligence files. This wasn't just a random ambush. Someone's been planning this for weeks." Foster's voice joined the conversation. "Charlie Squad has reached the western edge of the village. I can see those vehicles approaching. Looks like technicals with heavy weapons mounted. Maybe .50 caliber or 14.5 millimeters. Rivera processed this information while reloading his rifle. The enemy had lured them into a carefully planned trap using intelligence about their mission, their route, and their timing. But they'd also made one critical error. They hadn't planned for Overwatch. "All squads, converge on the mosque," Rivera ordered. "We'll make our stand there and wait for air support." "Negative," came Overwatch's voice. "The mosque is too exposed to fire from the southern approach. You need to move to the school building 200 meters northeast of your current position. Stone construction, better fields of fire, and I can provide better overwatch from my current position." Rivera looked toward the building she'd indicated. It was larger than the mosque, built with thick stone walls that would provide better protection against heavy weapons. But reaching it would mean crossing more open ground while under fire from multiple directions. "Davis, how much ammo left?" "1 belt. Maybe 200 rounds." "Make it count. We're moving to the school building." Rivera gathered his squad and prepared for another dangerous movement. As they prepared to bound toward their new objective, the distinctive crack of Overwatch's rifle echoed across the valley 3 times in rapid succession. 3 enemy fighters down, the sniper reported calmly. "You have a momentary window. Move now." Rivera's squad sprinted across the open ground while enemy fire erupted around them. Bullets sparked off stones and whined through the air, but none found their mark. They reached the school building as Davis's machine gun fell silent behind them. "Reloading," Davis called, swapping in his final ammunition belt. Inside the school building, Rivera found excellent defensive positions. Thick stone walls provided protection against small arms fire, and the windows offered clear fields of view in multiple directions. Most importantly, he could see the southern approach where enemy reinforcements were arriving. Martinez's Alpha Squad reached the building 2 minutes later, bringing their wounded with them. Foster's Charlie Squad arrived 30 seconds after that, having used back alleys and covered approaches to avoid the worst of the enemy fire. All squads consolidated, Rivera reported to Overwatch. What's our situation? Original enemy forces are down to approximately 8 effective fighters. But the reinforcements have arrived. I count 3 vehicles with mounted weapons, 20 dismounted fighters, and what appears to be a mortar team. Rivera felt the familiar sinking sensation that came with impossible odds. A mortar team could drop high explosive shells directly onto their building, turning their defensive advantage into a death trap. Heavy machine guns could punch through stone walls that would stop rifle bullets. And 20 fresh fighters would allow the enemy to attack from multiple directions simultaneously. Air support, Rivera asked, though he already knew the answer wouldn't be good enough. 2 minutes. But the enemy is moving fast. They know they have a limited window before your aircraft arrive. Through the school's windows, Rivera could see enemy fighters spreading out in a coordinated assault formation. Professional movements, disciplined spacing, overlapping fields of fire. These weren't insurgents with rifles. These were experienced soldiers with modern equipment and tactical training. The first mortar round impacted 50 meters short of their building, sending up a column of dirt and debris. The enemy mortar team was bracketing their position, adjusting their fire for a direct hit. All squads prepare for close combat, Rivera ordered. Fix bayonets if you have them. We're about to get hit hard. Martinez had positioned his soldiers at the eastern windows, where the main assault would probably come from. Foster's depleted squad covered the western approach. Rivera's squad held the center, ready to reinforce wherever the pressure was greatest. The second mortar round hit closer, maybe 25 meters away. The building shook from the concussion, and dust fell from the ceiling. The next round would probably be a direct hit. Davis, target that mortar team, Rivera ordered. Can't see them from here, Davis replied, scanning through his weapon's sights. They're behind that ridge to the south. That was when Overwatch's voice came through the radio again. Rivera, I'm changing position. Going to try to get a shot at that mortar team. Hold your position and keep your heads down. Rivera wanted to ask how one sniper planned to assault a mortar team, but there wasn't time for questions. Enemy fighters were advancing on their building from 3 directions, and the third mortar round was probably already in the air. Contact east, Martinez called out as enemy fighters appeared in the windows of buildings across the courtyard. Automatic weapons fire erupted from both sides as the Americans and their attackers engaged at close range. Foster's squad opened fire to the west as more enemy fighters approached from that direction. Rivera could hear bullets striking the stone walls with sharp cracks, fragments of stone, and lead flying through the air. The third mortar round hit the roof directly above them. The explosion was deafening, and Rivera felt the building shake like an earthquake. Dust and debris rained down, and someone was screaming, though he couldn't tell if it was one of his soldiers or an enemy fighter. Sound off, Rivera called. Everyone sound off. Alpha Squad, 4 effective. Martinez replied. Charlie Squad, 3 effective. Foster reported. Rivera's own squad had taken no direct casualties, but they were all shaken by the mortar impact. The next round would probably collapse part of the building. That was when they heard it, a sustained firefight somewhere to the south. Not the scattered shooting of an ongoing battle, but the concentrated fire of a close-range engagement. Heavy automatic weapons mixed with the crack of a high-powered rifle. Overwatch, report status, Rivera called into his radio. No response. Overwatch, do you copy? Still nothing. Rivera felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Their mysterious guardian, Angel, had gone silent at the worst possible moment. Without her sniper support, his soldiers would be overwhelmed in minutes. But the mortar fire had stopped. Whatever was happening to the south, It had disrupted the enemy's indirect fire capability. Martinez, Foster, hold your positions, Rivera ordered. I'm going to try to reach higher ground and get eyes on the southern approach. Rivera left his squad and climbed to the school's second floor, moving carefully through debris from the mortar hit. From an upper window, he could see the southern edge of the village where the enemy reinforcements had arrived. What he saw made no sense. The 3 vehicles were still there, but 2 of them were burning. Bodies lay scattered around the trucks, and Rivera could see survivors taking cover behind rocks and walls. Someone had attacked the reinforcement column and attacked it successfully. As he watched, muzzle flashes erupted from a position behind the enemy's left flank. A single shooter engaging multiple targets with rapid, accurate fire. The enemy fighters were trying to respond, but they were caught in the open and taking casualties. Rivera raised his binoculars and tried to identify the shooter. Through the magnified lenses, he caught a glimpse of someone in civilian clothing moving between positions with professional skill. Someone carrying a scoped rifle and using cover and concealment like a trained soldier. Overwatch. It had to be. Somehow, she had moved from her overwatch position to directly assault the enemy reinforcements. One person attacking 20 and winning. Rivera grabbed his radio. Unknown sniper. This is Rivera. Do you copy? Static filled the airwaves for several seconds. Then, Rivera, this is Overwatch. I'm currently engaged with a mortar team and their security element. Stand by. Are you insane? You're attacking 20 fighters by yourself. 19, came the calm reply. And now 18. As if to punctuate her statement, Rivera heard another rifle shot from the southern position. Through his binoculars, he watched an enemy fighter spin and fall. Besides, Overwatch continued. Your air support is 1 minute out. I just need to keep them busy until then. Rivera could hear helicopters in the distance now, the distinctive whop-whop-whop of rotor blades cutting through mountain air. Apache attack helicopters, probably, with enough firepower to end the engagement decisively. But 1 minute was still 1 minute, and a lot could happen in 60 seconds of close combat. All squads, Rivera announced, air support inbound. Prepare to mark our position and identify targets. The enemy fighters in the village seemed to realize their situation was deteriorating. Their attack on the school building intensified, with automatic weapons fire coming from multiple positions. They knew they had to finish the Americans before the helicopters arrived. Rivera returned to the ground floor, where his soldiers were engaging targets through the windows. Davis's machine gun was down to his last few rounds, and everyone else was running dangerously low on ammunition. Conserve ammo, Rivera ordered. Make every shot count. Through the eastern windows, Rivera could see enemy fighters moving closer. They were using covering fire and movement tactics, advancing in bounds while their comrades suppressed the American positions. Professional military techniques that confirmed these weren't random insurgents. Incoming, Thompson shouted as something metallic bounced through a window. Grenade. Rivera threw himself behind a stone pillar as the explosion filled the room with smoke and debris. His ears were ringing, and he could taste blood where he'd bitten his tongue, but he was alive. Anyone hit? He called out. Davis is down. Thompson replied. Shrapnel in the leg. Rivera moved to where Davis lay, behind his machine gun. The young soldier was conscious, but pale, blood soaking through his pants where metal fragments had torn into his thigh. I can still fight, Davis said through gritted teeth. Negative. Thompson, take over the gun. Thompson moved behind the heavy weapon and opened fire, but Rivera could see they were down to their last few rounds of machine gun ammunition. Once that was gone, they'd be down to rifles and pistols against an enemy that was closing for the final assault. The sound of helicopters was getting louder, but Rivera couldn't see them yet. Mountains and valleys played tricks with sound, making distant aircraft seem closer than they really were. Another grenade bounced through a different window. This time Rivera was ready, diving for cover before the explosion sent more debris flying through the room. The enemy was trying to soften them up before the final rush. Movement to the north. Foster called out. They're trying to get behind us. Rivera realized the enemy had been using the distraction of their frontal assault to position fighters for a coordinated attack from multiple directions. Classic military tactics that would overwhelm his depleted squads. Martinez, can you reposition to cover the north side? Negative. We're fully engaged to the east. Rivera was out of options. They were surrounded, low on ammunition, and facing coordinated assault from multiple directions. In about 30 seconds, enemy fighters would storm their building from 3 sides simultaneously. That was when salvation arrived in the form of 2 AH-64 Apache helicopters appearing over the southern ridge. Rivera had never been so happy to see American aircraft. The lead Apache immediately engaged the burning vehicles and remaining enemy fighters with its 30mm chain gun, sending up geysers of dirt and debris as high explosive rounds impacted around the enemy positions. Fury 6, this is ground call Rivera. He transmitted on the air support frequency. American forces in the Stone School building. We are surrounded and need immediate close air support. Rivera, this is Fury 6. We have eyes on your position. Mark your location with smoke if you have it. Rivera grabbed a colored smoke grenade from his vest and pulled the pin, tossing it outside where green smoke began billowing up from the courtyard. Green smoke marking friendly position. Enemy forces in buildings to the east, west, and north of our location. Copy green smoke. Engaging enemy positions now. The second Apache swung around to the east and opened fire with its chain gun. Rivera could see the devastating effect through the windows as 30mm rounds chewed through stone walls and enemy fighting positions. The concentrated enemy fire that had been keeping his soldiers pinned down suddenly slackened. All squads prepare to assist with target identification, Rivera ordered. Point out any positions that are still active. Martinez's voice came through the radio. Fury 6, enemy fighters in the white building with blue trim, approximately 100 meters east of the green smoke. Copy. Engaging white building. The Apache's chain gun swiveled toward the indicated target and unleashed a burst of fire that literally shredded the building's upper floor. Any enemy fighters who had been inside were either dead or no longer interested in fighting. Foster joined in. Fury 6, possible sniper position in the mosque minaret. Engaging minaret. The ancient tower disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris as 30mm rounds reduced centuries of architecture to rubble in seconds. The enemy attack collapsed almost immediately. Faced with overwhelming firepower from above, the surviving fighters began withdrawing from the village. Some tried to reach the vehicles to the south, others scattered into the surrounding hills. Rivera, this is Fury 6. We're tracking multiple enemy personnel fleeing the area. Do you want us to pursue? Rivera thought about it for a moment. These fighters had planned and executed a sophisticated ambush that had nearly wiped out his unit. They deserved to be hunted down and eliminated. But he also had wounded soldiers who needed medical attention. Negative Fury 6. We have multiple casualties requiring immediate medical evacuation. Can you provide security while we establish a landing zone? Affirmative. Medical birds are already inbound. ETA, 5 minutes. Rivera felt the tension drain from his body for the first time since the ambush had started. His soldiers were alive, the enemy was retreating, and help was on the way. But one critical question remained unanswered. Fury 6, we had an unknown friendly providing sniper support during this engagement. Last known position was south of the village. Can you get eyes on that area? Searching now, Rivera. Rivera waited while the Apache crews scanned the southern approaches with their advanced sensors. After several minutes, the lead pilot came back on the radio. Rivera, we're not seeing any friendly personnel in that area. Lots of enemy casualties, evidence of close combat, but no sign of your sniper. Rivera grabbed his binoculars and studied the southern ridge where Overwatch had been engaging the enemy reinforcements. He could see the burned vehicles, scattered equipment, and bodies, but no sign of the mysterious woman who had saved their lives. Martinez, Foster, start getting our wounded ready for medical evacuation, Rivera ordered. I want everyone accounted for and ready to move. As his soldiers began preparing their casualties for transport, Rivera continued scanning the surrounding area with his binoculars. Somewhere out, there was a woman with extraordinary marksmanship skills who had appeared at exactly the right moment and disappeared just as mysteriously. The medical evacuation helicopters arrived 10 minutes later, settling into a clearing that the Apache crews had secured. Rivera watched as his wounded soldiers were loaded on his stretchers and carried to the aircraft. Johnson, Davis, Williams, and 3 others from Martinez and Foster squads. All alive, all going home. As the medical helicopters lifted off with their precious cargo, Rivera found himself thinking about the voice on the radio. Calm, professional, lethal. Someone who had moved from overwatch position to direct assault without hesitation, engaging 20 enemy fighters single-handedly to protect soldiers she'd never met. Rivera, came a transmission from the lead Apache. We've completed our sweep of the area. No sign of additional enemy forces or your unknown friendly. You're clear to move to the extraction landing zone. Rivera gathered his remaining soldiers and began the march to where their transport helicopter would pick them up. As they walked through the village, he could see the effectiveness of both Overwatch's sniper fire and the Apache attack runs. Enemy equipment and casualties were scattered throughout the buildings, evidence of a battle that had started as an ambush and ended as a rout. But despite searching every building, every hiding place, every possible position, Rivera found no trace of the woman who had saved their lives. No spent brass casings, no equipment, no footprints that couldn't be explained by his own soldiers or the enemy fighters. It was as if she had never existed. Except Rivera knew she had. Every soldier in his unit had heard her voice on the radio, had seen the effects of her precise rifle fire, had benefited from her tactical expertise. She was real, she was skilled, and she had risked her life for strangers. As their extraction helicopter arrived and Rivera's soldiers climbed aboard for the flight back to base, he made himself a promise. He would find out who Overwatch was, how she had appeared at exactly the right moment, and why she had vanished so completely. Some mysteries demanded answers. The helicopter lifted off from the Afghan valley, carrying Rivera and his surviving soldiers back to safety. Below them, the village grew smaller until it was just another collection of brown buildings scattered across an endless landscape of mountains and dust. But Rivera's questions remained as large as ever. 3 weeks later, Rivera sat in a sterile debriefing room at Bagram Airfield, facing a panel of intelligence officers who seemed more interested in their laptops than in his answers. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the metal table where he'd spent the last 4 hours recounting every detail of the ambush. Staff Sergeant Rivera, said Colonel Mason, the senior intelligence officer, you've described this Overwatch individual as providing critical support during your engagement. But we have no record of any friendly forces in that area of operations. Rivera had been through this conversation 6 times with 6 different groups of officers. Military intelligence, CIA, Special Operations Command, and others whose agency affiliations weren't clearly identified. All asking the same questions, all receiving the same answers. Sir, I know what I heard. My entire unit heard the same radio transmissions. She identified herself as an independent contractor and provided precise sniper support that allowed us to survive and evacuate our wounded. Major Daniels, a woman with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who'd spent time in combat zones, leaned forward. The problem, Sergeant, is that we've analyzed the radio frequencies you claim to have used for these communications. Our signals intelligence shows no record of transmissions from an unknown source during that time frame. Rivera felt his frustration mounting. Ma'am, are you suggesting I made this up? That my soldiers imagined the sniper fire that kept us alive? Not imagined, Colonel Mason interjected, but possibly misattributed. Apache attack helicopters arrived on scene and provided close air support. It's possible that in the confusion of combat, you attributed some of their actions to this unknown sniper. Rivera had expected this explanation, but it still made his jaw clench. Sir, the Apache crews themselves reported finding evidence of close combat in the southern approach area. Multiple enemy casualties from small arms fire, not 30mm chain gun rounds. Someone engaged those fighters on the ground. Major Daniels consulted her tablet. We've reviewed the Apache gun camera footage extensively. While there is evidence of enemy casualties in that area, there are several possible explanations that don't require an unknown sniper, such as friendly fire incidents among enemy forces, improvised explosive devices, internal conflicts over tactics or leadership. She set down her tablet and looked directly at Rivera. The point is, we have no corroborating evidence for the existence of this Overwatch individual. Rivera realized he was fighting a losing battle. The military machine preferred explanations that fit neatly into operational reports and casualty summaries. A mysterious sniper who appeared from nowhere and vanished without a trace was the kind of story that created uncomfortable questions about battlefield awareness and operational security. What about the other soldiers in my unit? Rivera asked. Martinez and Foster both heard the same radio transmissions. Colonel Mason flipped through a thick folder. Staff Sergeant Martinez was recommended for a Bronze Star for his actions during the engagement. Sergeant Foster received a Purple Heart and an Army Commendation Medal. Both have been reassigned to units stateside. The message was clear. His fellow soldiers had been rewarded and moved on. Continuing to ask questions about Overwatch would not be career-enhancing. Are we done here, sir? Rivera asked. Major Daniels closed her laptop. Almost. There's one more thing. You've submitted several requests for access to intelligence files related to that engagement. Those requests have been denied. On what grounds? Need to know. The information you're seeking involves ongoing operations and intelligence sources that are classified above your clearance level. Rivera stood up from the metal chair, feeling the weight of bureaucratic dismissal settling on his shoulders. So that's it. My unit walks into a perfectly planned ambush that nearly gets us all killed. We get saved by someone who doesn't officially exist, and I'm supposed to just forget about it. Colonel Mason's expression didn't change. Staff Sergeant, you and your soldier survived a difficult engagement and performed admirably under pressure. Focus on that. Sometimes in war, good things happen that we can't fully explain. Be grateful and move on. Rivera saluted and left the debriefing room, walking through the sprawling base complex toward his temporary quarters. Bagram was a small city in the middle of nowhere, filled with soldiers, contractors, intelligence operatives, and others whose purposes weren't always clear. Somewhere in this maze of personnel and bureaucracy were the answers he needed. He just had to find the right person to ask. That evening, Rivera sat in the base recreation center, nursing a near beer and watching soldiers play pool and video games. The familiar sounds of military life surrounded him. Conversations about home, complaints about officers, speculation about deployment extensions. Mind if I sit down? Rivera looked up to see a woman in civilian clothes standing beside his table. Mid-30s, athletic build, with the kind of alert eyes that suggested military or intelligence background. Her accent was American, but there was something else underneath it. European, maybe. Free country, Rivera said. Well, free base anyway. She sat across from him and extended her hand. Sarah Mitchell. I'm a journalist covering military operations in Afghanistan. Rivera shook her hand, but remained cautious. Journalists meant stories, and stories meant attention he probably didn't want. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera. And I'm not authorized to speak to reporters. I'm not here for a story, Sarah said. At least, not the kind you're thinking of. I heard about your engagement 3 weeks ago. Word gets around on a base this size. What kind of word? Sarah glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. Word about mystery snipers and radio transmissions that don't officially exist. The kind of word that makes intelligence officers nervous and gets soldiers reassigned to other duty stations. Rivera studied her face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agendas. Sarah Mitchell projected calm competence, but there was something underneath it, something personal. Why would a journalist be interested in rumors and speculation? Because I've heard similar rumors before. Other engagements, other units, other mysterious interventions that don't make it into official reports. Sarah leaned forward slightly. I think someone is out there, operating independently, helping American forces when they get into trouble. Rivera felt his pulse quicken. You have proof of this. Not the kind that would satisfy a court of law. But I have interviews with soldiers who describe similar experiences. Radio contact with an unknown sniper. Precise long-range fire at critical moments. Tactical advice that saves lives. And then complete disappearance. How many incidents? For that I can confirm. Possibly more. Sarah pulled out a small notebook and flipped through several pages. Helmand Province, 6 months ago. A reconnaissance team gets surrounded by Taliban fighters. Unknown sniper eliminates key enemy positions, allows the Americans to break contact. No record of friendly forces in the area. Rivera listened intently as Sarah continued. Kandahar Province, 2 months ago. An explosive ordnance disposal team takes casualties from an improvised explosive device. While they're treating wounded, enemy fighters move in for an attack. Sniper fire from an elevated position disrupts the assault until air support arrives. Radio contact. Female voice, calm and professional. Identifies herself as providing overwatch support. Sarah looked directly at Rivera. Sound familiar? Rivera felt pieces of a puzzle starting to fit together. You said 4 incidents? The third was Kandahar Province, 6 weeks ago. Special Forces team conducting a night raid gets compromised. Heavy enemy resistance, multiple casualties. Unknown sniper provides covering fire that allows extraction of wounded and mission completion. And the fourth? Sarah smiled grimly. Your engagement. But here's the interesting part. In every case, military intelligence claims there's no evidence of an unknown sniper. Radio transmissions get explained away. Physical evidence gets attributed to other causes. Someone's covering this up, Rivera concluded. Or someone's very good at not leaving traces, Sarah countered. Think about it. A professional sniper who knows how to avoid detection, how to communicate without being monitored, how to engage targets without leaving forensic evidence. That's not just skill, that's training. Rivera leaned back in his chair, processing this information. You're talking about someone with serious military background. Special operations, probably. But why operate independently? Why not go through official channels? That's what I'm trying to find out. Sarah closed her notebook and leaned forward. I think this person is female, highly trained, and has access to equipment and intelligence that suggests government connections. But she's not operating under any official authorization. A rogue operator? Or someone whose official authorization is so highly classified that even military intelligence doesn't know about it. Sarah stood up from the table. I'm going to be in Afghanistan for another 2 weeks, following up on these incidents. If you decide you want to help me find answers, I'll be staying at the civilian quarters, Building 47. She walked away, leaving Rivera alone with his thoughts and a dozen new questions. Everything she described matched his own experience perfectly. The professional competence, the precise timing, the mysterious disappearance. But it also suggested something larger and more complex than a single incident. Over the next 3 days, Rivera found himself thinking constantly about Sarah's information. He tried to focus on his regular duties, but his mind kept returning to the voice on the radio and the rifle shots that had saved his soldiers' lives. On Thursday evening, he made his decision. Building 47 was a converted shipping container that had been modified for temporary civilian housing. Rivera knocked on the door and waited until Sarah Mitchell answered. I want to help, he said without preamble. Sarah stepped aside to let him enter. The small space was organized like a field office, with maps, photographs, and documents spread across every available surface. Rivera could see locations marked throughout Afghanistan, with lines and notations connecting various incidents. "What have you found?" Rivera asked. "More than I expected." Sarah moved to a large map of Afghanistan mounted on one wall. "I've been able to identify 7 incidents over the past 18 months where American forces reported contact with an unknown sniper. All female voice on radio, all providing critical support at decisive moments. 7. The 3 I told you about, your engagement, and 3 others I've discovered since we talked." Sarah pointed to locations marked on the map. "But here's the interesting pattern. Look at the timing." Rivera studied the dates written next to each location. They're not random. There are gaps of several weeks between incidents, but they're concentrated in specific operational areas. Exactly. And look at this. Sarah pulled out a timeline chart. Each incident occurs shortly before or during major military operations. Convoy routes being secured, reconnaissance missions, direct action raids. Someone has access to operational planning information. Someone inside the military command structure, Rivera concluded, or someone with access to intelligence that's shared with allies or contractors. Sarah moved to another chart showing equipment analysis. "I've also been researching the ballistic evidence from these engagements." Rivera looked at photographs of bullet holes and impact patterns. Professional work. Someone who knows exactly where to place shots for maximum effectiveness. The ammunition appears to be .308 caliber, probably match-grade hunting or military specifications. The shooting platforms would need to be accurate at ranges exceeding 800 meters. We're talking about someone with access to precision rifles and advanced optics. Rivera felt his excitement growing. This wasn't just speculation anymore. Sarah had compiled real evidence of a pattern that spanned multiple provinces and many months. "What's your theory?" he asked. Sarah sat down at a small desk covered with intelligence reports and photographs. "I think we're dealing with a former military sniper, probably American, who has gone freelance. She has access to intelligence through unofficial channels, possibly private military contractors or intelligence operatives. She operates independently, providing support to American forces when they get into trouble. Why? What's her motivation? That's the key question. Money doesn't fit the pattern. If she was a mercenary, she'd be working for whoever paid the most. But she's only helping American forces, never other coalition partners or Afghan government units." Rivera studied the evidence spread around the room. Maps, photographs, witness statements, ballistic reports. Sarah had assembled more information about Overwatch in 3 weeks than military intelligence claimed to have discovered in 18 months. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "I've been researching female snipers with military backgrounds. The number of women with advanced marksmanship training is relatively small. Cross-reference that with those who serve in Afghanistan or have connections to special operations, and the pool gets even smaller. You have names?" Sarah pulled out a folder containing military personnel files. "I've identified 12 women with the training and experience to conduct the operations we've documented. But most of them are still active duty or have solid alibis for the incidents we're tracking." Rivera flipped through the files, reading service records and assignment histories. Marines, Army, Air Force, even some Navy personnel with specialized training. All highly qualified, all with exemplary service records. "Wait," Rivera said, stopping at one particular file. "This woman, Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez, Army Special Operations. Look at her assignment history." Sarah moved to where she could see the file. "Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. Multiple deployments with special forces and Rangers. Advanced marksmanship instructor. Awarded the Bronze Star with V device for valor. But look at this," Rivera pointed to the bottom of the file. "Status: missing in action, presumed dead. 6 months ago." Sarah grabbed the file and read more carefully. Her unit was conducting a classified operation near the Pakistani border. Helicopter crash during extraction. 2 bodies recovered, but Vasquez was never found. Rivera felt puzzle pieces clicking together in his mind. Presumed dead, but no body. That means she could have survived the crash and been operating independently ever since. It fits the timeline, Sarah agreed. The first incident I documented occurred 3 weeks after her unit was reported missing. And if she survived a helicopter crash behind enemy lines, she'd have the survival skills and knowledge to operate independently. Sarah spread Elena Vasquez's military records across her desk. Combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. Qualified as a special operations sniper. Fluent in Arabic and Dari. Advanced combat medical training. Everything she'd need to survive and operate in hostile territory. Rivera studied a photograph of Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez in uniform. Late 20s, serious expression, wearing the distinctive maroon beret of Army Special Operations. She looked exactly like someone who could handle impossible situations with calm professionalism. "There's more," Sarah said, pulling out additional documents. "I did some research into her background. Elena Vasquez grew up in Texas, enlisted in the Army at 18. Lost her younger brother in Iraq during her first deployment. Her parents died in a car accident while she was deployed to Afghanistan 2 years later. No family ties to bring her home," Rivera observed. "Exactly. And look at this." Sarah showed him a commendation report. During her last official deployment, Vasquez's unit was ambushed while conducting a training mission with Afghan National Army forces. She provided sniper overwatch that allowed the evacuation of 6 wounded American soldiers. Rivera read the report carefully. The tactical situation described was remarkably similar to his own experience. Surrounded forces, precise sniper support, professional enemy fighters using coordinated tactics. "This has to be her," Rivera concluded. Elena Vasquez survived that helicopter crash and has been operating independently, using her skills to help American forces in trouble. Sarah nodded. "But we still don't know where she is or how to make contact." Rivera looked at the map, showing incident locations. "Actually, I think we do. Look at the pattern of engagements. They're not random. She's following American operations, probably monitoring radio frequencies to identify units that need help. So how do we find her?" Rivera smiled for the first time in 3 weeks. "We don't find her. We let her find us." 2 days later, Rivera sat in the passenger seat of a Humvee traveling through Wardak province, ostensibly conducting a routine security patrol. In reality, he and Sarah Mitchell were attempting to make contact with the woman who had saved his life. Sarah had convinced her editor that she was researching a story about rural development projects, which provided cover for travel to remote areas where Elena Vasquez might be operating. Rivera had volunteered for the patrol mission, knowing that moving through potentially hostile territory was exactly the kind of situation that attracted Overwatch's attention. "Anything on the radio?" Rivera asked the communications specialist riding in the back seat. "Standard traffic, Sergeant. Nothing unusual." Rivera keyed his own radio to the frequency his unit had used during the ambush. "Overwatch, this is Rivera. Do you copy?" Static filled the airwaves for 30 seconds. Then, "Rivera, this is Overwatch. I copy." Rivera felt his heart rate spike. The same calm, professional voice that had guided him through the deadliest engagement of his military career. "Overwatch, we need to talk. Face to face." A long pause, then why? Rivera had prepared for this question. "Because what you're doing is making a difference. American soldiers are going home alive because of your actions. But you're operating alone, without support, without backup. That's not sustainable." Another pause. "I manage fine on my own." "Elena," Rivera said, using her real name for the first time. "Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez. We know who you are. We know about the helicopter crash, about your unit being listed as missing in action. We know you've been helping American forces for months." The radio stayed silent for almost a full minute. Rivera began to worry that using her name had ended the conversation before it started. Finally, "Rivera, there's a village called Kalina, 15 kilometers northwest of your current position. Abandoned compound on the eastern edge, near the old Soviet supply depot. 1 hour. Elena, will you be there?" 1 hour, Rivera. Come alone. Rivera looked at Sarah, who had been listening to the entire conversation. Change of plans. I'm going in alone. Absolutely not. I didn't come this far to wait in a Humvee while you have the meeting of the century. She said, come alone. Sarah shook her head. She said that before she knew I was here. I'm a journalist, not military. Maybe she'll be willing to tell her story. Rivera considered the options. Elena Vasquez had been operating independently for months, trusting no one except the soldiers she'd saved. Bringing a journalist to their first meeting seemed like a good way to end the conversation before it started. But Sarah had been the one to connect the incidents, to identify the pattern that led them to Elena in the first place. Without her research, Rivera would still be filing reports that no one believed. All right, Rivera decided. But I do the talking. You observe and take notes, but you don't speak unless she asks you a direct question. The abandoned compound was exactly where Elena had indicated, a collection of mud brick buildings that had been empty for years. Soviet-era structures built during the occupation, later used by various Afghan factions, now home to nothing but dust and memories. Rivera and Sarah approached the main building carefully, aware that Elena could be watching them from any number of concealed positions. The compound offered excellent fields of observation and multiple escape routes, exactly what a professional would choose for a clandestine meeting. Elena, Rivera called as they reached the main entrance. It's Rivera. I'm here with the journalist I mentioned. Inside came a voice from within the building. Rivera pushed open the wooden door and stepped into a large room that had probably once been used for storage or vehicle maintenance. Sunlight filtered through holes in the roof, creating patches of light and shadow across the dirt floor. Elena Vasquez stood in one of those patches of shadow, positioned so that she could see the entrance while remaining partially concealed. She wore civilian clothing, brown pants, tan shirt, hiking boots, but carried herself with unmistakable military bearing. Her rifle, a precision instrument with advanced optics, was slung across her back. She looked exactly like the photograph in her military file, but with subtle changes that spoke of months living in harsh conditions. Her face was leaner, her hair longer, her eyes holding the hyper-alert expression of someone who trusted no one completely. Staff Sergeant Rivera, she said, nodding in his direction. Then, she looked at Sarah. Ms. Mitchell. Sarah seemed surprised that Elena knew her name. You've been watching us. I watch everyone. That's how I stay alive. Elena moved slightly, positioning herself where she could see both her visitors and the entrance behind them. You said you wanted to talk. Talk. Rivera had rehearsed this conversation in his mind during the drive, but facing Elena in person made his prepared speech seem inadequate. This woman had saved his life and the lives of his soldiers, then vanished without asking for anything in return. Why are you doing this? Rivera asked. Helping American units, operating alone, risking your life for soldiers you've never met? Elena was quiet for several seconds, her eyes moving constantly between Rivera, Sarah, and the entrance. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of personal loss. Because I know what it's like to lose people. I know what it feels like when help doesn't come in time. She shifted her position slightly. During my last official deployment, my team was providing overwatch for a convoy that got hit by an IED. We called for air support, called for reinforcement, called for medical evacuation. Everything by the book, through proper channels. What happened? Sarah asked quietly. What happened is that bureaucracy and authorization procedures take time. Time that soldiers don't have when they're bleeding out in a ditch. Elena's voice hardened. 3 American soldiers died while we waited for someone to approve the mission to save them. Rivera understood. He'd seen the same thing happen. Good soldiers dying while headquarters debated operational authority and risk assessment. So you decided to operate independently, Rivera concluded. I decided to be ready when proper channels aren't fast enough. Elena moved to a window overlooking the compound's entrance. I monitor military frequencies, track unit movements, position myself where I can provide support if needed. Sarah looked around the abandoned building. How do you survive out here? Food, ammunition, medical supplies. Elena smiled grimly. 20 years in the army teaches you how to live off the land. Supply caches, local contacts, captured enemy equipment. It's not comfortable, but it's sustainable. What about when you get injured? When your equipment breaks down? I handle it. Same as I handle everything else. Rivera could see the determination in Elena's eyes, but he could also see something else. Exhaustion, isolation, the psychological strain of operating alone in hostile territory for months. Elena, what you're doing is making a difference, but it's not sustainable long-term. You need support, backup, someone watching your back. Elena turned from the window to face him directly. I tried official channels for 10 years, Rivera. I followed orders, filed reports, worked within the system. And I watched good soldiers die because the system isn't designed for the reality of combat. So what's your endgame? Sarah asked. Do this until you get killed? Disappear forever? Help soldiers until you can't help anymore? Elena didn't answer immediately. Rivera could see that Sarah's question had touched on something Elena had been avoiding thinking about. I haven't thought past the next mission, Elena finally admitted. Rivera seized on that opening. Maybe it's time to start thinking bigger. What if there was a way to do what you're doing, but with official support? Real backing, proper equipment, legitimate authority? Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. Rivera, I'm officially dead. My unit is listed as missing in action, presumed killed. The Army has probably already held memorial services and notified next of kin. Details, Rivera said. Paperwork problems. What matters is that you're alive and you have skills that can save American lives. Sarah stepped forward. Elena, I've been documenting your operations for weeks. 7 confirmed incidents where you provided critical support to American forces. If I write that story, if I put together evidence of what you've been doing, it creates pressure for official recognition and makes me a target for every intelligence service and terrorist organization in the region, Elena countered. Anonymity is the only thing keeping me alive. Rivera understood her concern, but he also understood something else. Elena Vasquez was carrying a burden that was too heavy for one person to bear alone. She was trying to save everyone, protect everyone, help everyone, and it was slowly destroying her. Elena, you saved my life and the lives of 7 other American soldiers. We owe you everything. Let us help you. Elena moved back to the window, scanning the surrounding area with practiced eyes. Help me do what exactly? Rivera and Sarah exchanged glances. They discussed this possibility during their planning, but hearing Elena's story made their proposal seem even more important. Help you do officially what you've been doing unofficially, Rivera said. There are people in the military and intelligence community who would support what you're doing if they knew about it. People who understand that sometimes unconventional methods get conventional results. Sarah nodded. And there are journalists and advocacy groups who would back official recognition of your contributions. Public pressure can create opportunities for official acknowledgement. Elena turned from the window, her expression skeptical. You're talking about political processes that take years. Meanwhile, American soldiers are still getting into situations where they need help that won't come through official channels. Then, we create unofficial channels that have official backing, Rivera suggested. Special operations units, intelligence assets, military contractors. Ways to provide the support you've been providing, but with backup and resources. Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering the possibilities they'd outlined. Rivera could see her weighing the advantages of official support against the risks of exposure and bureaucratic interference. What exactly are you proposing? She asked finally. Rivera took a deep breath. This was the moment he'd been building toward, the offer he hoped would bring Elena in from the cold and put her skills to use in a sustainable way. Come back with us. Let Sarah tell your story. Let military intelligence debrief you about your operations and the intelligence you've gathered. Help them understand what you've been doing and why it works. And then what? Then we find ways to make it official. Special programs, classified operations, whatever it takes to give you the authority and support to do what you've been doing. Elena moved away from the window, pacing the length of the abandoned building while she considered their proposal. Rivera could see her thinking through implications, possibilities, risks, and benefits. "Rivera," she said finally, "what makes you think the same system that got your unit ambushed in the first place is going to support what I'm proposing?" It was a fair question, and Rivera didn't have a perfect answer. The military bureaucracy that had failed to provide adequate intelligence about the enemy ambush was the same bureaucracy they were asking Elena to trust with her life and her mission. "Because you've proven that unconventional approaches work," Rivera said. "Because 7 American units are alive today because of your actions. Because sometimes the best way to change a system is to show that system a better way of doing things." Elena stopped pacing and looked directly at both of them. "And if I say no? If I decide to continue operating independently?" Sarah spoke up. "Then, we respect that decision. Your location, your identity, your operations remain confidential. But we continue trying to document and support what you're doing, even if we have to do it from a distance." Elena nodded slowly. "At least you're honest about the risks." Rivera felt the conversation reaching a decision point. Elena was clearly considering their proposal, but she was also someone who'd learned to trust her own judgment above everything else. "Elena," Rivera said, "you've been carrying this mission alone for months. Let's help you carry it. Let's find ways to give you the support and recognition you deserve." Elena was quiet for almost a full minute, her eyes moving constantly as she processed their offer and its implications. Finally, she moved to her rifle and checked that it was ready for immediate use. "All right," she said, "I'll come back with you. But I want guarantees about how this gets handled, and I want the right to walk away if things don't work out the way you're describing." Rivera felt relief flood through him. "Absolutely. We do this your way, at your pace, with your approval every step of the process." Elena shouldered her rifle and moved toward the building's entrance. "Then let's go." "But Rivera?" "Yes. If this turns into some kind of publicity stunt or political manipulation, I disappear permanently. And next time you won't find me." Rivera nodded. "Understood." As they prepared to leave the abandoned compound, Rivera realized that Elena Vasquez's story was just beginning. She'd survived a helicopter crash, lived independently in hostile territory for months, and saved dozens of American lives through courage and skill. Now perhaps she'd get the recognition and support she deserved for those accomplishments. The three of them walked toward Rivera's vehicle, leaving behind the shadows and isolation of Elena's unauthorized war. Ahead lay the